All right. Good morning, everybody. I think we have our two guests who are online, so we're about ready to go. I wanted to first welcome you all to this press conference today to launch the 2021 Global Report on Food Crises. We are very pleased to be joined today by Mr. Dominique Burgeon, Director of the Food and Agriculture Organization Liaison Office in Geneva, and also Director of the Office of Emergencies and Resilience, and also by the World Food Programme's Chief Economist, Mr. Arif Hussain. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Mr. Hussain for opening remarks. Good morning.
It's Dominique who will start.
All right, so go ahead, please, Dominique, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and it's good to be with you again to indeed brief on this important report. At the 2016 World Humanitarian Summit, the EU, together with FAO and WFP, founded the Global Network Against Food Crisis as an alliance of humanitarian development actors working together to prevent, prepare for, and respond to food crises, and therefore support the Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 2 in particular. The Global Report on Food Crisis, which we launched today, is a global evidence-based public good publication of the Global Network. It is the result of a consensus among 16 partners, international, humanitarian and development partners. It is produced on a yearly basis, and it provides a snapshot of acute food insecurity in the world. The goal of the report we launched today, and which we launch on a yearly basis, is basically to provide consensus-based data and evidence to inform planning and decision-making to prevent and address food crises. I think it's important to clarify that it focuses on, indeed, acute food insecurity, which is the most acute form of hunger, which is so severe that it poses immediate threat to people's livelihoods and lives. The report, therefore, does not cover chronic hunger, which is the long-term inability to meet, food requirements. This year's report that we just published shows a serious increase in the number of people affected by acute food insecurity. In the 55 countries and territories covered by the report, the number of people in acute food insecurity rose to 155 million in 2020. If we deepen our analysis, we understand the gravity of the situation. Indeed, the 155 million represents a significant increase of around 20 million people compared to the 2019 analysis. When we look at, this is based on the so-called IPC, Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, and Cadre Harmonisé Classification, we see in the report that around 133,000 people in Burkina Faso, South Sudan, and Yemen were in IPC 5 catastrophe situation, and 28.4 million people in 38 countries were actually in IPC 4, emergency, really on the verge of catastrophe. In terms of geographic distribution, what strikes is that 10 countries and territories were actually home to 103 million of the 155 million people. So it means over 65% of those in acute food insecurity were just in 10 countries. The DRC, Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan, Northern Nigeria, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Zimbabwe, and Haiti. With, as you have seen from that list, Africa remaining, of course, disproportionately affected, Africa being home to 2 out of 3 people in acute food insecurity. When we look at the drivers, we see that, unfortunately, conflict and insecurity remain the main driver of acute hunger in 23 countries for more than 99 million people. Economic shock moved in second position compared to last year due to, of course, the compounding effect of COVID-19 and affecting 40 million people in 17 countries. Climate, finally, was the third main driver, the first most significant driver of acute hunger in 2020. Unfortunately, as we move forward, the outlook is not good. We see that the worsening trend in hunger continues. We project that at least 142 million people are expected, continue to expect crisis level or worse of acute food insecurity. And out of these, 155,000 are expected to be in phase 5. Especially in South Sudan, Yemen, and now we have even very disturbing information on also IPC5 emerging in southern Madagascar. So today we face again the danger that famine could break out, and I'm sure my colleague Arif will elaborate on that. So just to conclude, to remind, of course, people that out of these 155 million people, a vast majority of them depend, between 60 to 80% depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. They are farmers, they are fishers, even in conflict. They continue to farm. It is, however, more and more difficult, and we therefore need to assist them. Humanitarian assistance is absolutely key, but humanitarian assistance is not sufficient. We need peace, we need to work at the root causes, and we need to transform to the food system. So this is what I wanted to say to sort of kickstart the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let me give the floor now to Mr. Hussein.
Thank you very much. Just picking up from Dominique, I think it's fair to say that this report shows that our worst fears are coming true. Needs are nowhere near subsiding. We see hunger is going up, meaning acute hunger is going up. Just 155 million people in only 55 countries. So this is not the whole world. Just 55 countries have 155 million people in crisis or worse situations. We're also seeing that chronic hunger is going up. You see about 130 million more people estimated to be in chronic hunger in 2021 compared to 2020, or 2019 to be precise, in extreme poverty. World Bank says that in 2021, we're going to see about 150 million more people in extreme poverty. So to me, I mean, this is one, that all of these numbers are moving in the same direction, and they're moving higher. And that's concerning. What more than concerning? What Dominique was saying was that the factors behind it have not changed over several years. It is still conflict, big time. It is still climate, extremes, variables, and it is economic marginalization. But the multiplier effect behind all of this is COVID-19. So what was already going, up in terms of rising numbers got further accelerated by COVID-19. Now, in terms of looking at why this is happening. Well, by the way, let me just give you one figure which Dominique didn't say. In this report, we looked at what was happening in 2016 in terms of number of people affected by conflict and what is happening now. And it's interesting to notice that in 39 countries, which were common in, we analyzed them in 2016 and then also in 2021, what we found was that in 2016, there were 94 million people who were affected by conflict. And then in 2016, and then that number rose to 147 million this year in this report. That's a 56% increase. So it is literally fair to say that unless we resolve conflict, unless we find political solutions to conflicts, don't expect humanitarian needs to come down. They will continue to go up unless we resolve this. From year after year, we have seen this in the last 5 years, multiplied, exasperated, exaggerated by COVID-19 now, but that's the bottom. The second thing I wanted to emphasize is we have about 30 million people who are in IPC phase 5, not 5, IPC phase 4 and above, right? Which is essentially, and we are keeping them alive through humanitarian assistance every single day. And that is not changing. That number is not changing. They are reliant on humanitarian assistance, and it is continuing. And therefore, we need to make sure that we have, one, financing to get to them, and two, humanitarian access, sustained humanitarian access. And if we have the funding, and if we have the access, we will be able to continue to save their lives. And I think this is something which needs to be realized, that this is not going to go away from 2020 to 2021. Why? Because the root cause, meaning conflict, has not gone away. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me go first to the room. Edie from AP, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, thank you for doing this briefing. The figures are pretty dire, and as you mentioned, this is only 55 countries. How were these 55 countries chosen, and basically, why didn't you do the 193 members of the United Nations? And I wonder if you could more specifically address the impact of COVID-19 as you see it playing out this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to go first? Mr. Hussein, maybe?
Sure. So the first part, like Dominique was saying, that in this report we have there are 16 partners, and there are things in the world before COVID also, like IPC based classification, Cadre Harmonisé, which are like set systems in countries to figure out what is happening on the food security side. And these are mostly in countries where there are always, or there are problems, let me put it that way. When COVID struck, that meant that many new countries also became vulnerable. But those countries did not necessarily have these systems of consensus and IPC type, Cadre Harmonisé type, which could give you the figures right away. So in this report, we focus only on the countries for which we had data which was done in a traditional way, and there was consensus on the partners, with the partners. That's why you see only 55 countries. Having said that, different agencies like ours, others, we have the estimates. You have seen our estimates on acute hunger, and they have their place, and they will continue. On your second question on the impact of COVID, how do we see COVID playing out? Let me just say that first and foremost, declining incomes because of job losses. ILO says 3.7 trillion in their last report. You have last report, again, 255 million jobs lost, which, by the way, was 4 times more than the financial crisis. You have lower official remittances. You have, according to World Bank, 14% less remittances by the end of 2021. And by the way, this doesn't take into account what happened with informal remittances, which are way, way less. Why? Because people are not moving. You have issues of what really bothers me is the level of debt. Before crisis, end of 2019, $8.1 trillion was the debt. And that has exploded now. And that is a concern. And that was such a big concern that right now, for example, G20, they have suspended debt payments till June. IMF had suspended debt payments till end of April. So everybody is looking at it because poorer countries have such a burden, so they're rescheduling debt payments. And probably the biggest effect is that, so far, globally, countries big and small have spent about $23 trillion, 23 trillion with a T, dollars, to mitigate the impact of COVID and bring liquidity and economic stimuli to their economies. That is, by the way, about 25% of the global GDP. So our concern is that we don't see the needs going down, but we see that the government's capacities and international community's capacities to deal with these needs on that scale going down, which means that the gap between the two, what is needed versus how much resources we have, is widening. That means that we not only have to assist ourselves, people who are in dire situations, but also enable governments to make sure that every dollar, every cent which is spent gives the biggest bang. I think these are some of the things which we are looking at going forward. But if I had to say it in very, very small things, on the humanitarian side, funding, financing, early action, humanitarian access are the key things.
Thank you.
Dominique?
Mr. Burgeon, if you'd like to add.
Yes, perhaps, of course, if I may come in.
Please, go ahead.
No, thank you very much. And of course, agreeing with what Arif has said. I mean, to complement also, I think it's the first part of the question. It's important to keep in mind that the 55 countries that we are covering by this report basically absorb 97% of the humanitarian assistance. So it's also, I mean, it's therefore a very relevant set of countries that need to be kept in mind. Also, I think, yes, the point on COVID, and I will elaborate a little bit on COVID, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that, as Arif said, when you look at the trajectory, I mean, since if we look at the 39 countries that have been systematically covered by the report for the entire periods between 2016 and 2020, we see that there has been a continuous increase from 94 million to 147 million. So it means that the three main drivers we are talking about, and mainly conflict. Remember, conflict for this year report, 99 million out of the 155 live in situation where conflict is a main driver. So this is very important. And what COVID has done is that basically it has exacerbated all the vulnerabilities. And people who were already on the verge have been sort of pushed further down and have been moving to increased level of acute food insecurity. And let's keep in mind that when we are talking of acute food insecurity, we are talking of the most extreme, the situation where people have to cut on the quality quantity of meat, and where they have to go up to disposing their own belongings, their assets. I've seen people a couple of years ago in Madagascar having no other option than to sell their land. So if you realize when a farmer has no other option than to sell his or her land, I mean, it gives you an idea of the situation that that person is in. But it's true that, as I said, COVID-19 has been exacerbating this situation and creating disturbances at all levels. Of course, what is being described by Arif, but also at local level, it's important to keep in mind that all the measures that had to be taken by the countries to prevent the spread of the disease have led to a number of disturbances. For example, in farmers being able to sell to access the market in the cities, and therefore to sell their production, generate an income that would have enabled them to cover for their health, education, and even expenditures, and even to cover for the sort of diversification of their food basket that they are not able to cover. You know that in many of these countries, there are large populations depending on pastoralism for their livelihood. Pastoralism, by definition, requires movement within the countries and even across border. The fact that there has been these important measures put in place has complicated the life and therefore has had an impact on the food security of people. At global level, this said, I think FAO has been working very actively with partners to make sure that the market have kept functioning. We have been basing our work on the agricultural market information system, therefore always injecting transparency in the system and making sure that the market could keep flowing. So I think this is also very important, but it's clear that there has been a lot of logistic issues that have emerged and that have led in some cases to of course, impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's now go to the screen. We have a question from Evelyn Leopold. Evelyn, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the briefing. A side point, perhaps, that I wanted to know if the locust infestation has any impact on the food supply, or is it fairly under control? Thank you.
I think yes. I will handle that one, Arif, if you allow. So, well, thank you very much for asking this question. Of course, and I think this also points to the type of action that we are trying to promote, anticipatory action. This is what we need, and this is what we need at scale. You will remember that we came in front of this group about a year and a few months ago to basically alert that there was a big locust upsurge occurring in the Horn of Africa. And basically our point was that, well, we need to act now to control the locust so that we prevent a further deterioration of the food security situation in a region where about 30 million people were already in acute food insecurity. So I think we have the international community responded at scale. We had diversified contribution from many countries, from private foundations, etc. We were able to mobilize about $200 million to carry out large-scale control operations in the most affected countries, to carry out livelihood safeguarding activities for those communities that has been impacted, either communities depending on farming or communities depending on pastoralism. And the end result of that is that, according to our estimates, we have protected crops that are sufficient to feed about 24 million people for 1 year at a value estimated at $1.2 billion. So it means that when you invest 200 million, you have at least, at the very least, $1.2 billion in saving. The result of that is that there are still locusts are still present, in the Horn of Africa, but at much lower density. And our action now is to make sure that we, I would say, go to the bottom of it, that we maintain our strong surveillance capacities, and that we are able to treat the residual locust swarms that are there and that could threaten the livelihood of communities across the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Hussein, would you like to add something, or should we go to the next question?
No, I think it's okay.
Excellent.
Please.
So let's go
It's
to
okay.
let's go to Abdelhamid Siam from Al Quds Al Harabi.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the briefing. My question is about the 55 countries, and if it included the state of Palestine and the food insecurity, especially in Gaza, in light of the UNRWA financial difficulties. Does the report focus on Gaza? Thank you.
Why don't we start with Mr. Hussein this time?
The question is for either or
Yes,
both.
they can both answer, yes.
Would you like to go first, Dominique?
Yes, well, I mean, I would have to look at the detail, but indeed, I think we are indeed covering the food insecurity in West Bank and Gaza. So this is the short answer, and the report provides, of course, detailed analysis of the situation. But it's clear that there are population in acute food insecurity there.
Yes. Just to add to what Dominique has said, that this is a technical report which looks at the food security situation of countries. Same goes for Gaza, and it has been. And the idea is to present the situation in terms of its classification, as well as give the major causes of why there is food insecurity, and that is under the report.
And if I may add that indeed there are 2 million people moderately or severely food insecure and in need of assistance and were in need of assistance for the period January to December 2020.
Thank you so much. I do not see any other questions from the screen. If somebody else would like to ask a question, please just raise your hand, or I don't see any other questions. So if you have any remarks that you'd like to make in conclusion, Mr. Burgeon or Mr. Hussein, the floor is yours right now.
Arif can go first.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. I think this is an excellent report, which shows, like I said, a very grim situation, and unfortunately, that grim situation is not going away anytime soon. And all I will say is that in 2020, we were able to, as a food program, we assisted 115 million people, which was a record for us, all-time record for us, despite COVID, despite all those restrictions. And that happened. That was made possible because of the generous support, and because by countries in terms of making the resources available. It happened because we had access, and it happened because of our partners. Now, the problem is that whatever happened in 2020 has not gone away. And what we need to do is to continue working on this. This is why, like I was mentioning to you earlier, there are about, around 30 million people, 34 million people, to be very precise, who are in emergencies or worse situation across the world. And we had a FAO WFP, we had a call to action, basically stating that if we were to provide them, all those individuals, one single meal per day for a year, it will cost us about $5 billion. And the urgency of that $5 billion to do the same. And I think that is one thing which we need to understand. And then the second thing, again, I will go back to what I was saying earlier, is please don't expect needs to come down unless the root causes are resolved. And the biggest root cause is conflict. And what we see is that through conflict, you have hunger. Conflict creates hunger. Conflict creates poverty. Conflict creates destabilization. It gives a ground for terrorism. It forces people to be displaced out of their houses. And all of these things happen. So it is not, and we see this day in and day out. We're talking about famines in multiple countries. And all I want to say is that so far we have been able to avert those, but that's not going to last unless we have, what I said again, funding and access to begin with. And early action, by the way, is much cheaper than when you have to go in the middle of a crisis. I'm sorry to stop on this note, but this is the reality in which we are living in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burgeon.
Let me perhaps, yes, thank you very much. And perhaps I'll take it from where Arif left it. When we are presenting this global report, indeed, 155 million people in acute food insecurity. I think we didn't talk of the 208 million people who are on the verge of acute food insecurity in these countries. So it means that we also need to think at these people. As I said, out of the 155, between 60 to 80% of them depend on agriculture for their livelihood. Last year, FAO has been able to assist about 35 million people. This shows that there is still many people who are not getting the level of livelihood support they need. And I need to flag that agriculture is too often, I would say, overlooked as part of humanitarian assistance. There is a tendency to think that, for example, when there is conflict, agriculture stops. No, it is just much more complicated. But if we provide little assistance to farmers, they will thrive and they will be able to basically protect the livelihood of their households. And we see even impact in terms of displacement. And I would say, look at what I've described when it comes to the intervention, anticipatory action we were able to undertake in the case of the desert locust intervention. We need, as part of humanitarian assistance, to also provide agricultural-based livelihood support for crop, for pastoralists. And this is why we are also part of the call for action. Indeed, WFP is seeking $5 billion. We are seeking $500 million as part of that to indeed support the livelihood of those in the most acute phase of food insecurity. This said, I can't agree more with Arif when he's saying that, well, unfortunately, this is the very, when we see these people in IPC4, these millions of people in emergency phase, this is the last opportunity. So it's way too late for too many people already. We need to act much early. We need to work also on the root causes of these issues and try to avoid people even coming into crisis type of situation. And for that, as I said, peace is indeed absolutely fundamental when we know that 100 million people of them are indeed living in a situation where conflict is the main driver. So I would leave it there. It shows that as FAO, as WFP, when it comes to acute food insecurity, there is as much as we can do. This is a multi-actor action, and this is why the Global Network Against Food Crises, which is the initiative under which we launched this report, is really keen to engage, I would say, beyond food, also engaging with the peace actors, engaging with the health actors, engaging with the environment actors. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today. Just a reminder to everyone that both the report and press release are available online on WFP and FAO's website. Please come back. You're welcome anytime. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you, and have a good day, everyone.